One of my favorite quotations on prayer comes from pastor and author Eugene Peterson. He says, prayer is about being and becoming, not doing and getting. One of the reasons I love this quotation is I think that Peterson accurately summarizes the overwhelming majority of our prayer lives. He says that our prayer lives tend to focus on doing and getting. That is, our prayers often look like a child's Christmas list to Santa Claus. Our prayers consist of a list of things that we want to do, a list of things that we want to accomplish, and if we can't accomplish them on our own, then we ask for God's help to accomplish them for us. But Peterson says this is not the primary purpose of prayer. Rather, prayer is really about being and becoming. In other words, prayer is about our transformation. It's about being transformed into the image of God and his son, Jesus Christ. It is about submitting our will to God's will. And this is something that we see wonderfully illustrated as Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. Today, we're going to pick up in Mark chapter 14, verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Let's set up the scene. So Jesus has just had the Last Supper, and he walks out with 11 of the 12 disciples because Judas has already left them. And he takes the 11 to a place called Gethsemane. The Gospel of John will call it a garden. And he tells 8 of the 11 to sit at the entrance of Gethsemane. But he takes 3, Peter, James, and John, into Gethsemane. And he reveals to them the tremendous anguish and the tremendous pain that he is experiencing within himself. This is a particularly powerful moment as we see the humanity of Jesus and we see what Jesus is about to endure. You know, one of the things that we desire in our heroes is we want our heroes to be stoic, right? We want them to face challenges. We want them to face even death itself with a very stoic, non-emotional posture. We just want them to confront challenges and confront death coolly and calmly as if everything is going exactly the way they want it to go. Well, we don't get that picture about Jesus. Rather, we see a very human picture of Jesus who is in emotional turmoil. He is encountering a horrific situation, and he is in deep anguish and deep sorrow. He even says it is a sorrow to the point of death. So Jesus walking through Gethsemane is beginning to experience these emotions. So then he tells the 3, Peter, James, and John, to stay there as he goes a little bit further and he falls to the ground in prayer. This really reveals the emotional turmoil that he's experiencing, because it would have been very typical for Jews to raise their hands, face the heavens, and pray to God. Here, Jesus does the exact opposite. He falls face down as he begins to pray. Verse 35, going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," Jesus said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." The reason why Jesus is experiencing such emotional turmoil, this sorrow to the point of death, is because the hour is approaching. The hour and the cup. These are 2 important words that we often see in the Old Testament. And when they occur in the Old Testament, they typically refer to an experience of God unleashing his wrath. The hour that Jesus refers to, the cup that Jesus refers to, is literally God getting ready to unleash his wrath against his Son, Jesus Christ. You see, what Jesus has in mind here is what's coming in just a few hours on the cross. And we know that on the cross, Jesus becomes our substitute. It is our sin that deserves God's judgment. It is our sin that deserves God's wrath. But Jesus comes as a substitute. Jesus comes as a sacrificial substitute, as a suffering servant. He places himself in the position where he is willing to experience the wrath of God on our behalf so that we might avoid God's judgment, so that we might experience God's forgiveness. And Jesus is overwhelmed with this idea of experiencing the judgment and the wrath of God that rightfully belongs on all of humanity. But he is willing to take on himself as our substitute. We can understand why this would cause such emotional turmoil. And Jesus does make a request. He does say, "Take this cup from me." It's not wrong to express our desires to God in prayer. It's not wrong to tell God what we want. But notice Jesus' final words, "Yet not what I will, but what you will." Here we see Jesus' perfect submission to the will of the Father. Even though he knows he's about to experience God's judgment and wrath that he didn't deserve, but he's about to experience it. He says, "God, I don't know if I can handle this. This is almost too much for me. But not my will, but may yours be done." Here is where Jesus becomes the perfect illustration of the Lord's Prayer. "Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." In this prayer, Jesus is expressing his submission to the will of the Father. Here is an example of prayer that is about being and becoming. It's about submitting our will to the Father's will, understanding and trusting that God's desires and that God's will for our lives is always better and superior than anything we could come up with. So today I encourage you to read Mark chapter 14, verse 32 to 42, and read about this challenging moment in the Garden of Gethsemane and what it reveals about Jesus Christ as our substitute and what it reveals about us as we go to our God in prayer.